Okay, today we're going to show you how to change the indicator and wiper stalk on a Boxster 986. First thing to do, the most important thing to do, is disconnect the battery. So we're going to disconnect the battery now and then leave the car to sit for 10 minutes. Because we're dealing with the airbag, what we need to do is allow the airbag system to discharge, lose all its power. So disconnect the battery and let it stand for 10 minutes. We'll then disarm the airbag so there's no accidental deployment while you're working on it, because that can be quite a serious injury. Okay, so the battery's been disconnected. Now we're going to take the airbag and the steering wheel off. So the easiest way to show you this is put the camera behind the steering wheel. At the back of the wheel you can just see the screw hole there, which has got a splined or Torx bit inside, and there's one on the other side of the steering wheel as well. So there are two of those which we have to remove, and that will take the center horn push out and allow us then to access the fixing that for the steering wheel. So I'm just going to turn the camera off now while I undo those, and we'll take it from there. Okay, with the screws removed, the horn push pad comes off quite easily. Apologies for the camera angle, we're sat quite close to the car here. And on the back you have then the feed, which is the airbag feed into the back of the unit here. So what we're going to do now is very carefully pry this off with a screwdriver. Just one quick flick, it's just a pushing connector, and then that's off, as simple as. No damage, it's quite a straightforward push fit. So now the airbag module can go safely in the footwell, out of harm's way. Next thing we need to do then is disconnect all the wiring for the steering wheel controls, the horn, etc. So just disconnect the wires, all self-explanatory. And horn controls, as I say. Now this switch here, this plug in here, can actually stay in situ. What we're going to do is we're going to take the steering wheel off now, and we're going to let the wiring loom go down through the hole in the steering wheel when we draw the steering wheel towards us. So next thing we need to do is undo the nut in the middle of the steering wheel, which is a 24mm nut. So what you want is a socket and a short extension, and just undo that one. Take the nut off, and then I'll show you how to mark the steering column so we know the steering wheel goes back on the same place. Okay, so I'll take the nut off now. I've undone it with the socket, obviously. Now what we need to do is make sure the steering wheel goes back on the same place once we've taken it off. So I'm just removing the washer behind the steering wheel. Locking that. So the steering wheel is on a spline. And what we're going to do, we've got a black mark here already from assembly. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a dot punch directly underneath it, so we know that the two line up when we put the steering wheel back on. It'll be in exactly the same place, we know it will be centered. So just bear with me. Okay, so tiny little dot punch lining up with our mark on the column, so we know exactly where to replace the steering wheel when it goes to go back on. Now we need to replace the nut. Put the nut on 2 or 3 turns. That's in the right place. And what we're going to do is we're going to knock the steering wheel a couple of times with the palm of the hand, and then you'll see it'll come loose. And the idea of putting the nut back on is that you don't hit the steering wheel and have the steering wheel come off and tap you in the face, which can be quite painful. So undoing the nut. I apologise for the noise, just started to come on to rain. You can probably hear that rattling around on the hood. And then we draw the steering wheel off, like so. And then just feed the wiring through the steering wheel as we go. Discard the steering wheel off to one side. Now this little bad boy here is the spiral cable. Now inside this connection here, this is all the wiring for the steering wheel controls. This enables you, there's a collection of wires in here that are wrapped around to allow the wheel to turn 3 times in either direction without having the cables get tangled around the steering column. So what you have in here effectively is a winding of wire, and it's on a loose spool. So what we're going to do is going to put a little bit of tape on top of here to hold it in position, because if it comes apart, Sometimes they don't go back together very well, so we'll avoid that problem by just putting a little bit of tape on the top of it to hold it together while we're working on the column switches. So having just taped up the spiral cable now, everything's held together, just a wrap of masking tape, 2 little fixing screws, one in here, and then if you draw it forward, you just see at the top there's a little plastic plug in here. So what I'm going to do is disconnect that now, and then we're going to undo the screws that hold the column in place, the column cover in place. Okay, we've got 2 little screws at the side of the column here, here and here respectively. So now we're going to pop those out, and that will take the cowling off around here, and then it will expose the fixing that holds the switch onto the column. Okay, with the steering column cowls removed, you can see this switch is you know, in situ now. The column is exposed, all the trims are away. Spiral cable to one side. I couldn't actually get the plug out of that one, which is quite unusual. I don't want to risk breaking it because they're quite expensive, so I just lifted it out of the way. So what we're doing now is underneath the if I can just show you this very carefully, underneath the column there is a screw here, which I'm just pointing to, the brass screw. Not very clear, I'm afraid, but if you look underneath, there it is. It's a 10mm screw. Some of them are 8mm, depending on bolt, depending on which series of switch you have. But what we're going to do is put a spanner on here and just loosen this off. And before I do that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to mark on the column exactly where the switch comes to. So I'm going to put a line with a marker pen around the column, and I can see then that the line of the switch, because the switch slides down the column, there is a risk that you might have it too far in and might be too deep, or might be too close to the steering wheel, and you won't get the column cowlings to fit back on properly. So by just putting a ring around the top, I can see exactly where the line needs to come to, and where the edge of the metal plate on the switch housing, so I know exactly where it's going to be on the column when it goes back together. So I've just undone the nut underneath, which turned out to be an 8mm one in this case. Just pull the plugs off the back of the switches, here and here, quite straightforward, and then we're just literally sliding the old switch off, and that's it. Old switch is off. Put the new one back on, and it's a complete reverse process to put everything back together.